So welcome everyone to Violet's first mental well-being session, Zoom style. Tonight, my name is Eric Pennington and I have with me Brett Castle. And what we're going to do tonight is to talk about mental well-being. And I've got some preset questions, if you will, to ask Brett, and he's come prepared. And Brett, instead of me being the one to try to get all of your background and all of the things you've done, I'm going to let you maybe start by telling those that are on the session a little bit about yourself, your background, and what you do, and then we'll kick in with some questions.
Well, it's so good. Thank you for joining. I see some familiar faces, some people that I've known for quite a long time of this journey that I've been on. So I'm Brett Castle, married to my wife, Jeanne.
It won't let me.
I think I hear, if I talk and you hear someone else, just kind of hang in there. Recently retired from pastoring after just a lovely time in ministry. I've been counseling for now 20 plus years. It's hard to believe. My journey to become a counselor was a little bit different. My background was in finance and entrepreneurship. I'm so thankful for that now, because before I became a pastor, to understand kind of the business, the finance side, then the counseling, got called into counseling later on in my life, in my late 30s. Had the privilege of working in a Christian counseling situation. So I'm a licensed mental health professional, a licensed professional clinical counselor. And so when I became a pastor, really my background was in not only the business world, but also in the counseling world. So it helped me understand brokenness and the importance of mental well-being in our churches. Because quite frankly, let's be honest, we all bring ourselves to church, right? And all of us bring different experiences and different backgrounds, and some hurts and some wounds. And so I've just had the privilege, and I think I'll use that word, the privilege of walking beside hundreds of people over these 20 years and meeting people where they're at and helping them to go where they want to go. Not only from a clinical perspective, but from a scriptural perspective, a biblical perspective, a Christian perspective. And so my goal in being here tonight, I don't have all the answers. I've never pretended to have all the answers. There are some of you that will have deeper insight into certain areas, perhaps, that we talk about. Feel free to participate, as Eric would have you do that. So my goal is just to be here and to help and kind of just share with you what we're seeing and some strategies of dealing with some of the disconnectedness and the anxiety that we're dealing with in this period of time, some of the pressures that couples and families are dealing with, and then just to answer any questions that I can. So I think that's probably good, Eric. I don't know how much more you want.
I think you did awesome.
All right, good, brother.
That's great. And everyone, as everybody would probably readily agree, the elephant in the corner of the room is 2020 and COVID-19, and I don't know, probably 3, 4, 5 other things going. So it's definitely been a really volatile year, and I think we all would agree. And one of the things that I wanted to start with, Brett, is to talk about the practical stuff. What could I do tomorrow to make it a little bit better than it was today?
Yeah.
I'm certain tonight we'll get into some deeper stuff, and maybe what should I do here? Where should I go there? But maybe if you could start with, if you're in that place and you want to know, okay, so what could I do to help my mental well-being, starting, like I said, starting now, starting tomorrow?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the practical side of things is important. I would start with this. No matter what we're feeling right now, whether it be anxiety, whether it be worry, whether it be depression, whether it be a sense of stress, all of those things are normal. And I think sometimes, especially in a church community, when we talk about mental health, if we're not careful, we'll look at some of these struggles as a weakness, or there's something wrong with our faith, or there's something that is, my belief in God isn't perhaps as profound or as deep as it needs to be. But the reality is we're human beings. And all of the feelings that you may be dealing with tonight, I want you to know, first of all, are normal. With that being said, I think that there are certain key strategies that we can think about tonight that would be very helpful when we're dealing with those emotions in times like this. So let me just share with you just some real brief kind of bullet point practical things that you can think about and how you can apply them. So here's the first one. I think it's very important how we use our time right now. I think this is a great opportunity to reflect. So the very first thing I would say to you, use this time to reflect. And what I mean by that is think about setting some goals in key areas of your life. Also to think forward. Think about what it might look like when we emerge from this. What are some of the things that you want to do? What are some of the things that perhaps at one point you took for granted, but you want to re-engage in or appreciate more? Or where would you go? Who would you spend time with? Think forward. And so this is a great time to reflect. And I think there are, and again, let me, and I'm going to try to give this to you in very digestible pieces. I think there are 5 key areas for you to think about setting some goals in. And those 5 key areas are physical, intellectual, emotional, social, and spiritual. So physically, how are we taking care of ourselves? Intellectually, how are we stimulating? What are we learning? Where are we growing? Emotional, how are we managing stress? What are we doing for enjoyment? Socially, how are we staying connected when we can't be with people? Thank goodness for the technology we have, right? This would have never been possible when I was, a young man. And so for the reality of how do we stay connected socially, and then spiritually, of course, how are we growing the vertical relationship with God? So those would be 5 key areas that I would think about that. So I'll stop there and just, Eric, if there's anything you want to interject on that first point, just that time to reflect. Who do I want to be? What do I want to do? Those are the kind of things. Use this time as an opportunity to reset.
Yeah, that's great, Brett. And I think, my experiences, and friends and family, there's a sense of, and sometimes it's almost palpable, this disappointment that we were here, right? And I know, Brett, and you probably more than anyone could say, well, biblically speaking, we're not the first, but it's like anything else. Yeah, you could tell me all about all kinds of different civilizations and history and all that, but man, I'm kind of disillusioned about where we're at.
Yeah.
So in light of that and the 5 key areas that you gave were awesome. How can that play in as well? I mean, how do we maybe help to get past some of that?
Yeah, I as I understand your question, I think one of the things, look, you talked about the elephant in the room. This elephant in the room has required all of us to make a lot of adjustments.
Yeah.
And if you think about your life, think about that from the time you were a child to the time now, how many adjustments you've had to try to make in your life. We move from child to being a youth, to being a young adult, to being a middle-aged adult. Some of us, just speaking for myself, what does it look like to be an older adult? So we've made a lot of changes, a lot of adjustments. And when you think about that process, we have these needs, and when those obstacles in our environment don't allow us to meet those needs, that's where we deal with a lot of the stress or tension or the disappointment, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So we have these needs, we have these things that we want to do. So how do we maintain equilibrium in those points of time? What I have found is that one sign of really good mental health is how do we deal with life's adjustments? Because they are going to happen, right? They're just absolutely going to occur. So that process of having a need and then meeting a need, that is the process of adjustment. So when I think about the disappointment, I think about when I look back, one of the things that I was going to share in these really 7 key areas of maybe strategies to deal with this is to think about things that you've already successfully overcome. It will help with the disappointment. You know, when I think back to another difficult period of time in my life, is there anyone here that's ever had a difficult time in your life? Is there, yeah, can I get an amen? Can I get a show of
Amen.
hands, right? So I think sometimes if we reflect back and we see how we got through that or we successfully managed that, it helps us deal with the disappointment that we're dealing with now.
And Brett, can I interrupt you on that?
Yeah,
Do you think it's valuable to write that down?
absolutely. I think anything that allows us to reflect back, to make a note of our journey, to a timeline of our life where we see God intersecting that timeline and
Mhm.
how he was there for us.
Yeah.
And if you think of scripture, how many times did God have to go back and remind his children, hey, do you remember when I did this for you? And I did this for you? And I did this for you?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'll get you through this. So when I talk about disappointment, it makes perfect sense to me that what God is saying wants to say to me, if we're talking from a scriptural perspective, hey, Brett, do you remember when I got you through this and I was there
Mm.
for you here and how you overcame this and how you thought that maybe this would never end and it did? And yeah, I think writing that down is huge. Huge.
Yeah. Yeah. That's powerful.
Yeah.
So, kind of, I guess, circling a little bit back to those strategies again
Sure.
about what are some things we can do.
Yeah.
Um, so practically speaking, I want to start tomorrow morning, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Where do you think I start? I mean, in those areas that you
Yeah.
mentioned.
So for me, I think it's identifying how am I taking care of myself in those 5 key areas. But
Okay.
when I think about when I get up tomorrow, one of the things I would suggest to you, and this would be number 2, number
Mhm.
1 being that reflect, set the goals, think forward. Number 2 would be focus as much as you can on what you have control of.
Mm.
What I find is that we're spending a lot of time focusing on things we have no control over. So therefore, emotionally, I'm going to feel like things are out of control. I'm going to feel as though there's no power there. There's no, so the more I can focus on bringing focus to the things I have control over, how I spend my day, what do I do with my day, how do I respond to things. I think that's a practical thing we can do. When I talk to the people that I have the privilege of working with, they will tell me that one of the filters that they use when events occur is they ask themselves the question, is this in my control or out of my control?
Mm.
And they will use that filter to think about, I want to focus on the things I have control over. So one practical thing you can do tomorrow when you get up is to think about what how can I spend my day? What can I do with my day? What can I control? And I'm not talking about control issues. I'm not talking about, I understand that control can even be an illusion, but the reality is we're giving a lot of mental, physical, emotional energy to things we have no control over.
And Brett, I would just have to say this in brief. And I know in the time that I worked with you, and that was probably maybe 3 years ago. One of the biggest things, and I still use it now, is you ask me the question, what do you believe God has given you responsibility for?
Mm. Mhm.
And my list that was like this,
Yeah,
it got like that. And
yeah,
it was freeing because it was like, I know the things God has given me responsibility for, and I can let go of those others.
yeah.
So yeah, that's just very, very powerful. Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that in. So
Let me share number 3 with you.
yeah,
And again, I knew one of this was going to be a question, so I'm trying to give it to you in very digestible, practical ways. Number 3 is be very careful what you saturate your mind with. And what I mean by that is people watching a lot of news, people getting alerts on their phones with every update, um, focusing on things that cause worry or anxiety or anger. Be very careful about where you dwell in your mindset. And if you want to look at it from a biblical perspective, think about everything, just a few of the verses in God's word that talks about our mind. The three that come to my mind every time that I get to this subject are 2 Corinthians 10:5, that says the idea of taking your thoughts captive and make them obedient to Christ. And what I've learned is either our thought life takes us captive or we take our thought life captive. So mindset. So that's 2 Corinthians 10:5. Another verse that I think we would do well to reflect on is Romans 12:2, where it says, do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your what? Mind.
Yeah.
About mindset. And then let me just share one more, and that's Philippians 4:8. And you'll know that we're told to whatever is true and whatever is noble and whatever is right and whatever, and I'll go on down, excellent and praiseworthy, think on these things. As a cognitive behavioral therapist, I am a strong believer that our thought life leads our emotional life. So where we dwell in our mind is going to impact the way I emotionally feel. So if I saturate my mind with things that keep me upset, I got just a humorous story to tell you. I have permission to share it. I had the privilege of working with a gentleman many years ago, and he was dealing with anxiety. And as we just started to talk about it, one of the things we came to realize is that his whole movie collection was nothing but fear movies, fright movies, scary movies. So as he watched and listened those things, it increased his anxiety, right? And so I think that's what's happening in our news cycles every day. We're always wanting updates. We're always getting alerts. We've got to be really careful what we allow to come into our mindset.
Yeah.
Here's number 4. You got to set a routine. One of the things people are really struggling with is their schedule. Yeah. The family life and the work life is bleeding into each other. People are checking their emails from work at 8:30 at night, 9 o'clock at night, because they're working from their bedroom. So what do we have control over? What time we get up, when we eat our meals, what time we go to bed, when do we take our breaks, when do we go for our walks? We've got to set some form of structure. Okay? Or we just experience, at least what I'm hearing from a lot of people, is they're working longer, it's bleeding into things, they're out of whack, kind of when they're talking about their schedule. So you've got to set a structure. So that would be my 4th suggestion for people.
Okay.
I'll stop there before I share the last 3, if there are any questions.
Yeah, so with that, I would throw out to everyone, again, the chat is at the very bottom of your screen, and you can type in a question there, and we can pause for a minute and give you a chance to form. It's kind of challenging for me to get to you individually from a Zoom perspective, but I'm willing to give it a shot if you feel more comfortable with just verbal. As I look across the fruited plain. This is great attendance tonight.
Well, wonderful. Good.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah. So, and don't feel like you got some time limit, like, hey, you got to ask Brett a question now on this, or you're out of luck. So with that, Brett, so I'm not seeing anything. So continue on to the next.
I've already kind of pointed back to it, but one of the things that you would want to think about is, again, a past difficulty that you've gotten through. And I think the importance of that you've successfully managed is because it brings hope. You talked about disappointment, despair. If we don't think back, guys, and think about how the Lord has already brought us through things in our life that we've already overcome, when we're faced with this obstacle or this period of time, and we're just focused here, then we make ourselves vulnerable to that. So again, think a little bit about what you've already overcome, what God has brought you through. More hope there.
So, Brett, I'm going to interrupt you.
Sure.
We do have a question.
Sure.
One of the folks who missed, could you just touch real lightly on 1 and 2 again,
Yeah,
just real briefly?
absolutely. So number one is take some time to reflect. Use this as an opportunity, not an obstacle, to reset. So think about some goals you want to accomplish in the future. Think forward. Think a little bit about key areas of life, and I'll share them briefly again: the physical, the intellectual, the emotional, the social, and the spiritual. I think that's the 5 ways God created us. And so for me, when I think about those areas of my life, this is an opportunity to set some goals in that. Number 2 is focus on what's in your control. The more you're able to focus on what's in your control, the less out of control things will seem to be. So those were the first 2.
Great, thank you.
Are we up to number 6? Is that where we're at?
I think we are. I think we are.
I love this one. And Gail, I want to go back to what you said about Anne, was it? Is that your daughter?
I think so.
Yeah. Are you ready? Try something new. What's one of the things you can do tomorrow? You can begin something. And I wrote down a list of things I've heard just in the last 3 or 4 days where people are trying something new. And I would love to hear some other strategies. Maybe you could chat down there, share with them, and or just so, but baking something new. People are drawing, learning to draw, learning to paint. People are picking up musical instruments and learning new musical instruments, or dusting off the ones they already have at home and trying those. Okay, there you go. People are reading more. People are gardening. Flower beds. People's yards are looking really great. Anyone notice that? I mean, people are spending some time in the yard, right?
Yeah.
Photography. People are having virtual dinners. They're getting together with friends or extended family members, and they're logging on and having a Skype or a FaceTime, and they're eating dinner together and visiting like they would be doing that in the home. A lot of people are decluttering and donating things. They're taking a drawer at a time or a closet at a time, or they're doing something that they're accomplishing a task. Some people are taking time to organize family photos and writing stories that go with those so that they can record for their family history. So those are just examples of things that we can try new. And then number 7 is there are all sorts of apps and websites that are available to us for anxiety, for grief, for stress management, to avail ourselves of the types of things that become great resources for us. So those 7 things came to my mind, and from a variety of sources. I think that if we do those things, we're able to deal with a little bit in a more healthy way the adjustments and disappointments and emotions we're dealing with through these difficult, challenging obstacles. To me, I look at them as opportunities for resetting a lot. We're learning, listen guys, here's the big thing. We're learning instead of doing. We're moving from doing, we've got to learn how to be. And for a lot of people, we're very much doers. We do. Now all of a sudden we got to learn how to be. And that's a great opportunity, but that's a growth experience as well.
So Brett, I would throw this out to you. Maybe it's an overly simple question, but do you think this would be a good idea to do even if the second half of 2020 is super great?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Look, guys, and I say guys and gals, I'll try to eliminate that word, but here's the reality. If all we do is change for this short period of time, what do we do? How does it become a habit in our life? How does it become really who we are, not just something that we do? So to me, this is a wonderful opportunity to reset, to reprioritize, to develop kind of this game plan for this next part of our life.
Yeah, that's great, Brett. That's great. So I know that I wanted to kind of touch a little bit on the deeper side of some of the challenges that can come about. You mentioned anxiety a little earlier, potentially depression, things like that. And though tonight we're not going into deep clinical talk, what are some of the signs that maybe my issues need more than maybe those suggestions you gave earlier, that maybe I need to talk to a counselor or a psychologist, something like that?
Sure. One of the things I love about Violet is how many great resources you have at Violet. You have caring pastoral staff, wonderful lay leaders who have a lot of experience. So, and of course, we have a wonderful Christian counseling community in Columbus. We're gifted that way. But these would be some of the signs I would be looking for in my own personal life or in the life of the people I interact with. And I will preface this by using the word change. There are some changes that we need to pay attention to. So, for example, some of the big ones that are noted that make a lot of sense are like change in sleeping patterns, change in eating habits. If we start to see an increase in a lot of physical complaints, there's a more headaches, more stomach aches, more physical symptoms than someone's accustomed to dealing with. Here's a big one, and I want everyone to make note of this, and is isolation. One of the challenges churches are facing now is how to stay connected to their people. And if we're not careful, if we rely on a pastor to keep everyone in the loop, we're going to miss some people. So if you start to notice people isolating themselves, or if you isolate yourself, you find yourself pushing away, these are signs we want to pay attention to. I see Keith up here, and I know he has such a great heart for your youth there. And this isolation is a real struggle. Kids are feeling very isolated. They're very social creatures, and they're not being able to go to school together. They're not being able to hang out together as much. So, but if someone comes to your heart that you've not heard of or not seen that you were usually in contact with, reach out to them, because isolation's a big one, Eric. And then the last one that I would mention, I'll mention two more. One is that if you find yourself not participating in the things that you used to enjoy, if you notice that people who used to love to do this no longer find any joy in it, there may be some things that they would want to process with someone. If they can't find those things if they can't lay back or lean back on those things that used to bring them a lot of joy, that would be a big red flag. And then certainly if there's any signs, any threats, any talk of self-harm, that would be another big one. So those were the 6 or 7 that I think are probably would be the things that would be very noticeable.
Right.
So changes in any of those types of things, I think we want to be very, very aware of.
Very aware of. Yeah, that's great. I think one of the challenges, at least in my experience in our culture, that I guess we'll say United States of America, right, is that, Brett, if I said to you, oh my gosh, Brett, before I started tonight, I broke my ankle, you would ask me, oh my gosh, what are you doing? You should be, why aren't you in the emergency room? Or what are you doing? And I would say, well, maybe it's not broken. Maybe it's sprained. I put something on it. I got a splint. I got it home. Or if I called you, Brett, next week and said, Brett, I can't see out of my right eye. Brett, you're going to say, have you seen your specialist, Eric? Right? If I said, hey, Brett, I got diabetes and my hemoglobin A1C was like 10.8. You'd say, Eric, that's really, really high. But in our culture, it seems that when we talk about, Brett, I hit a wall. I just can't seem to get anything going. And I don't enjoy doing the things I used to do. As a society, I think sometimes we shrug our shoulders as if, I don't know what to say to you. So if someone who's on the call tonight or maybe gets to see it later, who's kind of feeling like they're in that place, what do you say to them?
Yeah. I would say reach out to someone.
Hmm.
Um, and the reason for that is this. Again, I shared with you that I think that even as people of faith, we start to think that if we're dealing with any of these emotions, there's something wrong in our faith journey or our faith walk. I think that again in the church, I know Violet is different. And again, because I know your pastors, I know your staff, I know people like Eric, I know your lay leaders. These are people who have cared and invested in people's emotional well-being for a long time. But let me say this, if you're looking for a biblical example of this and reaching out, it would be simply this. When you look at the Old Testament, all of you are familiar with this section of writings called Psalms. And if you look at the Psalms, I believe there's 150 of them. Am I right, Bill? I think there's 150
All
of them.
right.
I think there are. If I left one out or two, a little grace. Okay, good, brother. If you notice those Psalms, what you notice is that they're not what we call a collection of happy tunes.
Right.
This is every single human emotion. Anger, am I right, Keith? Disappointment, depression, feeling like you're abandoned, feeling like there's no hope. And yet, think about this. God allowed that to be recorded forever in his book. So the question becomes why?
Mm.
And the way I've settled that in my heart is this. It shares with me, it shows me, no matter what human emotion I'm dealing with, I can bring it. I don't have to apologize for my anger. I don't have to apologize for my depression. I don't have to apologize for, I can bring it not only to him, but he has equipped people in the body of Christ to say, hey, look, I'll journey with you. I'll go along with you. And so for me, I would just say to anyone out there who's struggling, man, use the resources. If we believe that he's given everyone gifts and callings and ways to use our God-given gifts, avail yourself of those things. There's no need to go through the struggle alone. There are resources available. There are tools available. And I would say this, you're exactly right, Eric. If I'm having a physical problem, I go see my doctor.
Yeah.
If I'm someone who's dealing with high blood pressure, I'm going to take my medicine. If I'm someone who deals with diabetes, I'm going to take my medicine. And yet we look at things like medicine and mental health as something that's wrong. And I would say, why do we view that way? Man, we want to avail ourselves of everything that is given to us as an opportunity. And again, I would just point to those things. That's what I would say to people, Eric.
Yeah. And that's great, Brett. And I think that when we look out, and I know that it can be a deeper reason for how we got to the place of where we felt like the mental thing would just, again, you mentioned the feeling that, hey, my walk is not as strong because I've hit a wall or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned David in the Psalms, and I think that's a great example. And I'm going to pull this one out as a little bit of a surprise because this particular person, I think, illustrates that surprise, right? Where you kind of go, oh my gosh, and that's Elijah.
Mm.
I mean, when you think about that experience, that mountaintop, where it was like, if God made it so clear as to who was God and who was not. And then it went south, if you will.
Yeah.
But could you talk a little bit about God's grace and how he interacted with Elijah in that setting? Just a little bit. I know I'm surprising you, but
no, that's okay. If you think about it, one of the things I've noticed about, when we talk about God's grace and all of these things, one of the things that I've often wondered about is let's go back, if we could, guys, a couple generations.
Mhm.
right? Let's go back 2 generations. What was the mentality of people in seeking help 2 generations ago? How many men's small groups were there 2 generations ago?
Yeah.
How many women's small groups? And I know I haven't gotten to your question, but
That's okay.
this came to my mind as we were talking. We've come a long way in the church, and I want people to hear that. Now we have people who generationally have changed the way we interact with one another. Now we do have men's small groups. Now we do have women's small groups. Now we do have youth ministries when we have people trained to intercede and things like that. So one of the things I found about God's grace in that is he has shown us that the things that perhaps we didn't used to get help for, a lot of doors have been opened, a lot of barriers have been broken down. So I would just say again to those of you out there that might be struggling with something, how it's changed and how the church's view of it is changing. And this week I got a text from Keith that said, "Hey, can we get the youth involved?" And absolutely. So we're seeing change. So I just want to encourage you that change is coming. So now let's go back to your question. Specifically, when you're talking about how God deals with Elijah, what are you pressing in
Yeah,
on?
I guess what I'm thinking, Brett, is that it seemed to me that, we would look at his experience as that mountaintop, the experience with the prophets of Baal and how God showed up, right?
Yes.
And then when Jezebel sends the message, I'll poorly paraphrase, by tomorrow, it's going to happen to you. At least for me, I kind of thought, okay, he's going to say, well, hey, I just saw what God did. He'll do it again. But he went the other way, right? And I love how God met him at that place, again, with grace.
Yeah.
And I guess what I'm thinking that connects to this issue when we don't necessarily always know why we hit the wall. But man, how that grace just leaps out. So I kind of wanted to bring it up from that perspective.
So there's 2 things that come to my mind there. And the very first one, I would have everyone think about the word through. We want to go over or under or around. We don't necessarily like the word through. We're going through a pandemic. I don't think if I said to anyone up here, hey, how many of you would vote that we continue to go through it rather than it be over, or could we go around it? But I think in that particular story, there's value in the word through. Even though I walk through the valley, shadow of death, I will fear no. The idea of through is where growth happens. And then I would say this quote from a book. I'll quote the book. It's called "Change Your Questions, Change Your Life" by Mary Lee Adams. There's a wonderful quote in there that I've held on to for a number of years, and it says this. It says that in some of our stumbling blocks, we find our greatest treasures. So for me, a lot of the stumbling that we see in the Bible brought people to a new treasure, brought people to a new way of looking at God, looking at the situation. And so for me, when I think about how that translates to 2020, we're going through it, guys. We're going through it. However, the value of going through oftentimes outweighs the going around or the over. So to me, the through is, I was reflecting in my own private Bible study about Paul. And Paul said, and you'll know the words, he says, I've learned to be what?
Content.
Content. Bill, when you preached on that sermon, you talked a little bit about contentment, right? Yeah. I think we missed the word learn. Paul had a lot of learning to do. Paul had to learn to be content. And I think there's a lot of learning opportunity here. We have to learn as we go through things to be content. And that's not an easy journey. And I'm not here saying that if you're not content right now, there's something wrong with you. No, it's a learning opportunity. Paul, who wrote maybe 2/3 of the New Testament. Am I right there? Said he had to learn. I not for a minute don't think Paul's in a jail cell, shackled, going, not struggling with his lot line, because he's the one who said, be made new by the renewing of your mind, take all your thoughts captive. So he had to learn. Guys, this is such a wonderful learning opportunity if we'll just remember that can be a goal in this.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's great, Brett.
Yeah.
So you mentioned earlier about the reaching out. Don't go it alone. Don't isolate. And obviously, for everyone that's on the session, you know, these are the beginnings for what we want to do with a mental health ministry at Violet, so that we can begin to be on purpose with those resources too.
Mm-hmm.
And we're trying to build that. And I guess what I want to think about, because I want to be practical again, Brett, if somebody comes away tonight and goes, you know what, I'm going to do something about it. I have hit a wall and I need to talk to someone. And I know there's tons of counselors out there. There's the insurance thing and all of the above. If you could give just some very basic tips on what would be the next steps if they decide they need to do that.
So here's how I would probably look at that. Number one is you can go to your pastor, who have wonderful resources. They have built a network. You know, oftentimes, and I think back to when Keith would send me a situation, he would just say to me, and, you know, hey, I'm dealing with this. And if it wasn't in my scope, I would refer. So he's developed a network of people who are available to deal with different things. So you can go to your pastor and just simply say, hey, look, I'm struggling with this. Can you give me a name? Can you give me a couple resources? So that would be a first suggestion. The second thing that you can do is you can go onto a website and type in Christian Counseling in Columbus, Ohio. The firms will come up, the different organizations that are Christian counseling organizations. Mm-hmm. You should be able to click on a clinician, look at the counselor's bio, see what their area of focus, see their background, see the areas they work in. My philosophy has always been, it's never about the shepherd, it's always about the sheep. So I refer away more than even I accept, for sure. And we want to get you to the right place. So by going to a pastor, going to a website, maybe talking to someone to say, hey, have you had a good experience here? That's what I would do, Eric.
Okay, that's great. That's great. I think that will definitely help. Well, right now we're coming up on 7:50. I want to give you guys an opportunity. Maybe we'll give Brad a little breather, allow to take a sip or two. And if there's any questions, again, you can type in the chat, which is at the bottom of your screen. I will scroll through as I look visually. If you raise your hand and I can see you, I will be more than happy to unmute you or ask you to unmute if you have a question for Brett. I want to make sure that that's available to you as well. And hopefully you're finding this super valuable. I think at this point, Brett, what I'm going to do, Keith, can I ask you to unmute yourself?
Yeah.
And Keith knows I'm not picking on him by unmuting himself. Yeah. But I know we kind of communicated previously. Is there something that maybe you'd want to throw out as a question for Brett tonight?
Yeah, Brett, I appreciate you you being here. And let me just give a plug for somebody who has referred families. There's a lot of good options, but what I love about Directions Counseling is that they have so many counselors, and you can go on and see their pictures. And I have girls that just want to meet with females, and then next to their picture is a list of all their specialty areas, and it helps to be able to zoom in. And it is in Worthington, but some of our students are more comfortable going to the other side of town, to be transparent, than they would be in Pickerington. I want to, trust me, there's a question coming here, but I wanted to share. You mentioned isolation, and I was really overwhelmed the first couple times we got back together with our students, and they finally had a chance to open up. We went out to the woods. We did this worship in the woods, and we had about 8 minutes where they could share what they've been experiencing and going through. And I spent hours on the phone with parents after that 8 minutes, cleaning up the suicide thoughts and the depression and the cutting and the eating disorder and just the spiraling out of control. And it seems like in isolation, a lot of times we choose self-medication. We choose to numb out. And some of the things that I've heard from students and also adults as well, obviously drugs and alcohol are a form of numbing out, self-medicating, pornography, eating. One of the things that's big with our students is social media scrolling, just hours of endlessly scrolling, the gaming that happens, and then even online shopping. And so a lot, it's a wide spectrum, but what I think the common denominator in those is this whole idea of the dopamine that those things provide, whether it's drugs or pornography or, the scrolling. And I guess I would just love to hear from you. What are some of the things that you are learning about all type of dopamine addictions? And so what are are there any common threads or common principles in all those that might be helpful as we are parenting students who are caught up in some of that self-medicating, spiraling inward thing? Or maybe some of us have found ourselves in some of those dopamine addiction spirals. Is there anything that you have found that can help kind of stop that spiral, or how we can help others?
Yeah, that's a great question. I had the opportunity to come down. Was it Super Slam, or is that Summer
Super
Slam?
Summer.
Super Summer.
Super Summer, yep.
And these were a group of youth leaders, correct, Keith? And then
Yes.
The one thing they wanted to talk about was anxiety, right?
Mm.
Those feelings of that you're talking about. One of the things that I would say to parents who are especially dealing with people from junior high to high school is remember when you were in junior high or high school. I call it going to the dark side of the moon. And what I mean by that, think about that Apollo 13 movie. And what happens is if you think about small kids, and I know, Becky, you're a preschool teacher, right? Man, they want the teacher's attention. They want to socialize. They want to be around the parents. They want to play the games. They want to do all of those things, right? So my idea about what happens in our junior and senior high is all of us kind of begin to pull away from and kind of go to that dark side of the moon where we're kind of out of contact, which makes us very vulnerable to the things you're talking about, Keith. So the very first thing I would say to parents who are parenting that is you're going to have to take intentional, 2 words, intentional and attentional steps. You're going to have to go with them there because they're not necessarily going to come to you. You can look for the changes we talked about earlier, but be very intentional about times together as a family, dinner times together, communication times together, because chances are they're not going to come to you and talk about numbing out. You're going to have to be very active and proactive to look for those things. Now, here's the great news. Apollo 13 came back, right? We got them around the side of the moon. I love that movie, and they connect with them again. So one of the things we see happening after oftentimes those teenage years, as they become young adults, they re-engage. So I would say to you that are parenting those, be very intentional and attentional to those things, because what we're seeing is they're substituting, right? They're taking something that they used to find connection physically, intellectually, emotionally, socially, and spiritually. Those needs are now out of equilibrium. They're not going to school. They're not being able to get together with their friends at the pool, or they're not being able. So how are they finding connection? They're finding connection through those other things. So just be very aware that not only is this time working against you, but also that stage of life. So you need to be very, very engaged. And Oftentimes you're going to hear, come on, give me a break. It's okay. Keep on pressing in. Because the alternative is we disengage. While they're disengaging, it gets further apart. And we're going to miss those things, Keith.
Yeah, let me, Brent,
Yes.
let me talk about the other side of life, okay? And
Okay.
a senior type person.
Yeah.
The idea of, especially in a time like we're in now, maybe of giving up.
Yeah.
We're here now, and there's hope is gone. We're isolated. How do we handle that? How do we help others handle that?
Yeah. One of the things that I also appreciate about Violet is they appreciate the more mature population, like myself. Thank goodness for that. So, but it's been a real challenge, right? Because we're vulnerable. We're more in the higher risk. We have to be more aware. And so our connection was what? Our connection was going to church. Our connection was getting together with people, And so because we're in that period, we're very, very vulnerable. So this is what I would say to people. You too also have to be very intentional and attentional. If when they're having a meeting online, some of you are back perhaps in church and you feel comfortable with that. There may be people out there who are not comfortable yet. And I would say to you, still get connected to the online services or the online groups or make sure that you connect to people through Zoom or FaceTime? I have some kids, I have 3 sons that are all over FaceTime and Skype and all of those things. You have to be very intentional. If you sit back and wait, you'll just continue to grow in isolation. And I think that's what you were talking about, Bill.
Yes.
You really have to be very proactive because we are all dealing with that for sure. So it doesn't matter your age.
Yeah.
Being proactive, and intentional, that's a great thing.
That's great. Thank you, Brett. We do have another question from the audience. So what's your take on the idea of practicing spiritual disciplines to address unhealthy stress? Disciplines include solitude and silence, simplicity, Sabbath, and slowing. And he references Mark Connor's book, The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry.
I love, don't know that book, but one book I read every year is Richard Foster's Celebration of Disciplines.
Yes.
And it talks about, I think, inward, outward, and corporate disciplines. And one of the quotes he used in there is from a psychologist. I want to say it might have been Carl Jung, but I'm not sure, so don't hold me to that. He said, I think he quoted in his book, that hurry isn't busyness, or hurriedness is not of Satan, it is Satan. And the idea of solitude, be still and know that I'm God, meditate, ponder, these words have value. There's a reason they're important. One of the disconnects, going back to what Bill was talking about, if you think when you went to church, the benefit, we know in Hebrews it says, let us not give up meeting together as some are accustomed to doing. When we went to church, it addressed all 5 areas that God created us. It was physical, we had to go somewhere. It was intellectual, we learned something. It was emotional, we worshiped, had joy, we were able to pour out our sorrows. There was an emotional. It was social, we were with people, and it was spiritual. So if we think that this psychology or this counseling, this was all, God had all this worked out, amen? Mm-hmm. So this idea of the spiritual disciplines, prayer, fasting, meditation, solitude, simplicity, silence, those are great tools for dealing with life, dealing with whether it be stress, sorrow. So again, a little plug for the book, The Celebration of Discipline by Richard Foster. I don't know what copy I'm on. It gets read once a year because I got to stay grounded and in that, and I have to look at my own discipline. So yeah, so amen to whoever set that in. I'm a strong believer in it.
Great, great. And one of the last things, at least from my vantage point, Brett, and we'll get closer to the end here. One of the things that I find, and you kind of alluded to it in so many words about people feeling like, hey, I should be better, or maybe I'm not strong enough in my faith if I'm blah blah blah. And the work that I do, I talk a lot about self-empathy. We talk about empathy, and that's typically right toward others, their situations where they're at. But self-empathy is very important too. And it's so key because when we do fall short, being able to accept God's grace, right? And I had someone ask me, what if I'm this, and what if I'm not kind of wired that way? And I said, hey, look, the only reason you would ever have to feel bad about yourself in the setting of this personal growth journey is if you decide I'm not going to do anything. I'm not going to work at it. I'm not going to practice any disciplines. Then you could probably feel bad about it. Yeah. But ultimately, if you're willing to show up to practice, sports analogy alert, and you're willing to put in the work, you will get the results. And I think sometimes, Brett, we kind of mystify some of these things, right? I long for the day when we go, oh, I'm having an issue with my emotions and I've hit a wall. Okay, I got to call my counselor. Oh my gosh, my back aches. I got to call my chiropractor. Where it's equal, it's normal. How do you, when you think about the discipline thing, that does imply some work we've got to put in. Yeah. Is there any suggestions around that? Does it come back to that pattern and setting up a routine, or are there anything else that you could throw in there?
I'll go back to your question about the doctor and the chiropractor and you should have a team. You have a pastor, you have a friend, you have mentors, you have doctors, you have a dentist, and to know good, competent counselors in key areas, I think is just an asset that we should not pass up. So for me, I pray for the day also. Unfortunately, we still live in a time where there is that stigma. I have pastors who will travel across the state to talk with me because they don't feel safe in their own community. That's unfortunate, right? I have couples, I do a lot of marriage work, which is probably 75-80% of what I do. They're not going to go to a counselor in their area because they don't want someone to see them or someone in their church to know. So the answer to your question, I think for me, is doing something. I love a quote. I wish I knew where I got it. Maybe some of you know where this at. It says that what Satan does is he builds strongholds in the secrets of our lives, and he reinforces it with silence. And if we'll just break the silence, if we'll just break, the minute we take it and get help, we break the stronghold that Satan can have in our lives. So when I was thinking about that, I was thinking about how many times have we sat in pews? How many times have we sat with friends and there was something going in their life that they didn't feel safe to share? And so I would say to this community, be a safe place where people can share. Be someone that is willing to walk alongside one. You may not be the one to help them get to the end line, but man, if we can create a culture of care, and I'll go back to your grace statement, we don't struggle with God giving us grace or peace. We accept that God is a gracious God. We'll even extend grace to someone else, but extending grace to ourselves is still a hurdle we need to overcome.
Yeah. Wow. Well, that's great, Brett. Everyone, we're going to close it out. We do appreciate you coming and spending time with us. Well, and Brett, the best for last. I really appreciate your time and you coming and doing this. Hopefully, Because when we initially started talking about this, it was going to be a live event at the church and all
Yeah.
of that. But then we had COVID-19.
It was still live, wasn't it, Becky? I see Becky there. I see Fred. I see Gail. There may be others. I haven't clicked over, but thank you for coming. And that just shows me you want to learn, you want to grow, just like, and again, never pretended to know the answers.
Yeah.
But man, if I can learn and grow with people, that's a great thing.
And then practically speaking as well, last thing, Brett, if someone here tonight wants to get a hold of you specifically,
Sure.
Could you give them your contact information if you don't mind?
Yeah, and again, there may be someone out there that wants to talk about a situation, and I can give you a really good referral or a couple recommendations. Being semi-retired now, that's one of the great things, right? So I'm available, but here's the number: 614-888-9200. My extension is 120. I check my voice if I'm not in an appointment, if I'm not in a meeting, it'll ring right to me, and I'll spend a few minutes talking with you. How can I, tell me kind of what's going on, and let's get you to the right shepherd, right? Or shepherdess. So let's get you to the right help. So feel free to do that, and be more than happy to do that.
Great. That's wonderful. Once again, thanks everyone for coming on tonight, and we hope you'll have a great evening, and look forward to doing this again soon. Thanks again, Brett.
Anytime I can help, Eric, make the call. I love your church. It's a wonderful, wonderful church with so much love, and it blesses me to even be a part of it. So
Thanks again.